Drug overdoses and fentanyl poisonings are the leading cause of death for Americans ages 18 to 44, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. While the statistic is alarming, numbers alone can feel abstract. For many, the true weight of the crisis doesn't sink in until they see a face or hear the story behind the loss.
There is a stereotype for people who are in addiction, and it's not true. And then when people read their stories, put that together with their face, and they say, oh, that sounds like my brother or my father or my sister, they really understand it.
In this episode of Grieving Out Loud, I'm sitting down with the directors of a powerful nationwide nonprofit using art to shine a light on the fentanyl crisis. The Into Light Project creates detailed graphite portraits to remember people who've died from fentanyl poisoning and drug overdoses. Their work is not only raising awareness, but also offering healing to families who've lost loved ones.
They can walk in and look at a portrait, and a mother in Maryland did this and said, this is the first time I can hold my head high. It just makes them feel like, not only is their loved one being honored, but their life meant something.
Welcome to Grieving Out Loud. I'm your host, Angela Kennecke. Before we start this important conversation, I want to speak directly to anyone who may be struggling with substance use disorder. You are not alone, and your life matters. Please know that help is available. We have a list of resources on our website, emily'shope.charity. You can find a link in our show notes. Teresa and Barbara, welcome to Grieving Out Loud. I heard about Into Light from a friend of mine, a fellow mom in North Dakota, who was hoping to bring your exhibit to her. And she says, you have to see this. And as a mom who's lost someone to fentanyl poisoning and who lost an artist, it was especially appealing to me. I'm just really excited to talk to you about this big project that you're working on and what you're doing and why.
Thank you. Well, so glad that the word is out there throughout the country, because that's exactly what we're hoping for.
That's Teresa Clower, the CEO of Into Light Project. She founded the nonprofit after experiencing a devastating personal loss, the death of her third child, Devin.
How do you describe Devin? First of all, as he grew, he kept growing, and he was very thin and very, very tall. So the way to summarize Devin is to say he was our exclamation point. He was full of life, funny, gregarious, really sharp-witted. He was always kind of in the mix of anything rambunctious or, outgoing. So you'd find him as a kid on skateboards and bicycles, and he was very athletic. So he was well-adjusted. And then sometime in high school years, he started experimenting with marijuana. And we knew about that.
Teresa says things really started to take a downturn when one of Devin's friends offered him an oxycodone for back pain. That one pill began a decade-long struggle with substance use disorder. Had he moved on from pills to heroin?
He had, at the very end.
Yeah, and that's so typical. I mean, there's a trajectory that my daughter followed and so many others. And I think as parents, we're just even to this day, all these years later, I'm horrified to say that. That my daughter was using heroin, and I bet you feel the same way.
Absolutely. And I remember when one of the counselors laid that on me, that, and Devin even said, because we were talking about the idea of treatment and how far along are you? And I said, well, he's certainly not using a needle of any kind. And he said, Mom, I am. I remember that so clearly because it just indicated to me how far into this disease he truly was.
Those 10 years of substance use disorder, what kind of toll did they take on you and your family?
It was rough. Devin went from, like I mentioned earlier, this gregarious, fun-loving, middle child part of the family to this individual that you never knew who you were going to meet. He could be very angry. He could be, rummaging through the basement looking for things that he could hawk. But at the same time, we never stopped loving him and we never stopped supporting him. We didn't subscribe to the tough love situation as a family. We felt that it is a disease. We were knowledgeable enough to know that this was not something Devin could really control. And yes, he needs treatment, but we need to be there to support that. So it took a great toll on the family. His older brother tried very hard to find him work, and then he was disappointed with his basically Devin disappointed all of us in so many ways. So we all pitched in and did what we could. And then eventually it got to the point where, he was isolating himself.
And I think, Teresa, that we really do lose our kids before we physically lose them. You talk about that time period and how he was a different person. And I could say the same about my daughter. I started with the tough love in high school, but soon realized that wasn't working. It was just pushing her away. I was told to do a lot of that, by counselors and different people, experts who were telling me how to rein my daughter's seemingly out of control behavior in. But I, too, also always approached her from a standpoint of love and acceptance and unconditional love. When I realized that those things that were so hard to do, those tough love things that were so hard to do, weren't working. But I clearly remember a day that I was in her room and she was still alive. She had moved out of my house and I just felt like my daughter had died because she was no longer my daughter. Like this was not my kid. And so it's this complicated grief. It's so complicated when someone suffers from substance use disorder.
Definitely. And it's hard because it's not pleasant being around someone who's stealing from you, who you can't trust to be in your home. It's an ugly disease. And I understand where people are put off by it. It's not fun. And it tears people apart. It tears families apart. But at the bottom of it all is a human being. And that's so much of what we and Into Light Project are reminding ourselves of constantly. These are human beings.
And Devin did seek help. He tried several different programs. After battling the disease for 10 years, he completed a treatment program, and this time seemed to be doing very well. He had a full-time job, was living on his own, and was staying away from substances.
And then he had a date. He had his first date in a long time. And that unglued him because it was a perfect storm of him having some money. He had a car. We were out of town, so he was borrowing our car. And he had this date. And that was when he ingested this poisonous, it was cocaine, I believe, that ultimately.
Laced with fentanyl.
Laced with fentanyl. With the onset of fentanyl in so much, he, as you said, like your daughter, was poisoned. And he was poisoned because he did not anticipate that whatever it was that he was taking at the time had fentanyl in it.
In February of 2018, Devin died from fentanyl poisoning at 32 years old. Teresa was heartbroken. In the midst of her grief, she found herself reaching for a pencil and paper, turning to art as a way to cope with the pain.
And I decided that the way for me personally to work through so much of that grief, especially early into it, was to draw his portrait. And that was the beginning of the project. I have a fine arts background, but I had not been practicing any of my art for 45 years, and I had never done a portrait. So where this all came from is a mystery to me, but it exploded. And once I finished Devin's portrait, and it was really cathartic, really powerful, I was saying goodbye to Devin in the process. And when I signed my name, the floodgates just opened. And with that, I could not stop thinking about portraits, drawing portraits, and to make it meaningful, because, I could do busy work, but to make it meaningful, this kernel of an idea began taking shape, like could we simply represent this epidemic in a way that draws people together, tell the stories, draw the faces, and really portray those that we've lost to this epidemic is to, portray them as human beings.
Because I think so often our children are judged solely by how they died. So they were a drug addict, they were less than human. In some cases, I've even heard comments on social media, they deserve to die, these kinds of things.
Yeah.
I even hear comments on social media now that just are so outrageous that we shouldn't be providing naloxone to people because if they're using drugs, they should die. These kinds of ideas that we have in our society. And so I think what you're doing is incredible because you are trying to preserve the humanness.
Yeah. We have a saying, we really live by this principle, and everything about Into Light, they're graphite portraits, so they are pencil. And most people think in terms of portrait being color. We very intentionally chose graphite, and everything about it, the name of the organization. And the reason for that is with graphite, we say that we all are made up of light and dark, and no one should be defined by simply their darkest moments. So we really do believe that, there's that opportunity or that ability to be hateful, to be any number of things, but that's not the whole you. And so why should we judge those that are dealing with this hideous disease in a manner like it's their fault, they're bad people, etc.? Yeah.
Right. So very important. You did a drawing. First of all, you had that skill, even though it was buried for decades. You had that skill, but also very important. You do this instead of a photograph of people, right?
Yeah, definitely. Again, everything is really, really thought through. We all see thousands of images a day, truly, between internet, billboards, everywhere you go, there's photographs. And they're so ubiquitous, they've become almost non-impactful. Whereas if you see a drawing done by hand, done by a human being with care, it will stop you dead in your tracks. And there's something about the eyes in these drawings. You have to get that just right. And it's powerful. This is an art activist project. Art has an ability to span conversations, hard bridges that we have to really cross together. It has, and historically always had, that ability to bring people together in a way that a photograph couldn't do.
So you do this drawing of Devin and you get this idea. Did it just come to you suddenly, or how did that evolve?
I do a lot of hiking, and especially back then, I was doing a lot of walking, meditation, and just soul searching shortly after Devin died. And I remember clearly this spot in the woods where, this light bulb went off. And it was really funny because, I didn't have any idea how this was going to roll out. But with Devin's death being in Baltimore, I thought, well, that's where the first exhibit, I'm going to do 41 people. And that was based on the number of people that die every 5 hours. And that was very intentional as well, because we wanted the media to ask us about the number. And then we could talk about the outrageous number of deaths at that time. So it did beg the question, and it did serve a purpose. But yeah, I remember exactly where that spot was.
Some would call that divine inspiration, that moment in the woods.
I have no better way of explaining it. So, yeah. And especially the fact that I'd never done portrait work. That's scary to me.
Teresa also believes it was divine intervention that led her to cross paths with Barbara Francois, who would eventually become the COO and a narrative writer for Into Light Project.
Barbara and I had not met each other. We were at a Martin Luther King breakfast in February, so it would be just about 1 year after Devin died. And I had done his portrait in the fall of the year he died, so 2018. And I knew I was heading in this direction, but I met Barbara, who is also an artist. I wanted to see her artwork. So I said, I have an idea. And for some reason, there was just an energy and connection with her that I felt very confident it would be helpful to talk with her about this idea. So I brought over a big pot of lentil soup and some bread, and we sat over lunch, and I said, this is my idea. What do you think? And she said, this goes down in the history of this organization. Teresa, you cannot, how did it go?
You can't not do this. You have to do it. Yeah.
Teresa says Barbara was the perfect fit to help launch Into Light.
I have a background in my family with it, and I've been affected by it on many levels. I'm also an educational psychologist and a writer and an artist, not a portrait artist. And all of those things appeal to me. And I'm always looking for why people do what they do as a psychologist and why people behave the way they do. And trying to find the humanistic side of everything. There's always a reason going on, not just random. And so I really was intrigued. I wanted to help tell the stories of people who had died this way because it's important. It's important work. And humanizing addiction is really necessary.
Right. We tend to dehumanize it. That is really what we do with all the stigma that's out there and that I know still exists, to this day because I see it or hear it every day. What do you think it's going to take to do away with all of this stigma and for people to really understand addiction as a disease of the brain?
I think exactly what we're doing, and definitely one of the biggest things that you can do is to humanize people. So when you see their faces and tell their stories, we tell the stories in a way that, it shows who they were as a complete human being, not just their addiction. That's certainly a part. I mean, we can't deny that was a part, of course, but there's so much more than that. When you walk into one of our exhibitions, it looks like it could be a group of people who just won scholarships or an award for something, there's not any particular one look, but there is a stereotype for people who are in addiction, and it's not true. And then when people read their stories and put that together with their face and they say, oh, that sounds just like my brother or my father or my sister, they really understand it. They make that connection by looking into their eyes, seeing their beautiful faces and reading who they were as complete human beings.
Have you lost a loved one to overdose or fentanyl poisoning? I'd like to invite you to share their story on our new Emily's Hope Memorial website called More Than Just a Number. They were our children, siblings, cousins, husbands, wives, aunts, uncles, and friends. So much more than just a number. You can submit a memorial today on morethanjustanumber.org. The organization launched its first exhibit back in 2019, honoring 41 people from Maryland who lost their lives to fentanyl poisonings, overdoses, or related causes. Each hand-drawn portrait is paired with a personal story that shows who they were, not just how they died. When the exhibit wraps up, each family receives their loved one's framed portrait and a book that includes all the stories from the exhibit.
There was literally cold calling. People who we'd find names from obituaries or someone we refer us to someone in Baltimore. And we had very little to show. We had no exhibit. We had a very, very simple website. And that's how it began.
Yeah. Was it hard to get that first exhibit up off the ground and going?
Mm-hmm. It was a little challenging in that we didn't have a track history, but we were able to fill it. And we've had more challenging states since then, truly. There's so much stigma still out there that there are states that we have dealt with that we were not able to get people all 41 slots filled. That blows my mind.
Here's how the project works. Families submit photos and stories of their loved ones who have died. From there, a professional artist creates a hand-drawn portrait. and a professional writer crafts a narrative that honors the person's life.
And then the artist and writer work directly with the family, communicating the, first drawing they'll send to the family, what revisions need to be made. So we work closely with each family. And it isn't until the family says, that's my loved one, that's the story I want portrayed, that we stop. So we go through as many revisions as necessary in order to get to that point. We have a goal of one exhibit in every state in the country. We're now working on our 17th state. By next year, we have already lined up 2 more states, and we're hoping to line up 2 more. It's a long-range project. If we could find, maybe someone of your listeners can help with this, but if we could find a sponsorship for this organization, we could knock it out of the park in turn. We have the support nationally with the artists and the writers, and so we could really probably accelerate twice as quickly. But for now, we're very comfortable with that.
One of the things that, first of all, it brings families together in community. At our openings and at our gifting gathering, the portraits are gifted at the end of the exhibition. And they have a lot of support and community of people who understand what they're dealing with and what they're going through. So that's really important. But more than that, they're proud. They can walk in and look at a portrait, and a mother in Maryland did this and said, this is the first time I can hold my head high. It just makes them feel like, not only is their loved one being honored, but their life meant something. And, they knew that, but not everyone appreciated them. And so they feel like, this is a place of honor, and they're so grateful to be able to participate and to, help others to understand the stigma around drug addiction and feel like they can enter into conversation with them.
Our exhibits are held generally on college and university campuses. And the reason for that is that so much a part of this organization is education. So we bring the portraits, the writing, statistics, and all of that to an exhibit, and it acts as a catalyst for conversation and opening up conversation about addiction. So when you put the exhibit in a gallery on a university campus, then you have all of those disciplines from the different colleges who can come together. They come together and bring the exhibit into their coursework, which is fabulous. We also have had exhibits, of course, in other places like museums, in Delaware Art Museum, the History Center in Florida, which was wonderful. They did oral histories on top of our work. So we're pretty flexible, but we definitely emphasize the educational component. That's important to us. One of the interesting little side projects, I guess it is, that came about is we have what we call our Ask Me About Button campaign, and we reproduce every single portrait on a button, a little 2.5-inch button. And then on the back of the button is a QR code that takes you to the story of that person. Everyone at the exhibit is asked to participate in this effort to open conversation by taking a button of someone they resonate with and wearing it. And it is what we call our walking exhibit. And it has been a phenomenal success. We have kids in spring breaks doing an entire town in Colorado with the button campaign. We'd have police officers in Mobile, Alabama wearing them during Prevention Week. It's just been a really good addition to our original work.
What a great concept. I love that. And then you also put together a beautiful book that you leave the people with as well.
Yeah, it's a wonderful bound catalog. It's beautiful. And when you open it, on one side of the page is the narrative, and the other side is the scanned portrait. So everyone goes home with that as well after our gifting gathering.
Right now, Into Light has 2 exhibits on display, one at the University of Iowa, running through mid-December, and another at the University of South Alabama. open until the end of June.
Once we complete all of our states, our goal is a national exhibition. We archive everything. It's professionally scanned and archived. We're being very, very protective about this body of work because it's pretty unique. And then our goal is to reproduce this entire exhibition of over 2,000 portraits and narratives and take it to D.C. at a time when hopefully this epidemic will have a little bit better outcomes when this happens. But that is our goal, to keep that memory alive as well as this body of work that can provide so much information about the families and the people that have struggled with this disease.
As one of the nation's strongest financial organizations, First Premier Bank and Premier Bank Card have the strength to do good. We support nearly 700 organizations and nonprofits. Our employees give more than 30,000 volunteer hours annually. And we are continually seeking ways to make South Dakota an even better place to live. It's the Premier way. First Premier Bank and Premier Bank Card.
And in addition, you have some curriculum. Somebody wrote some curriculum surrounding this as well.
Yeah. A 7th grade teacher in Colorado, Shannon Herzog, shout out to her because she works for an EL school, which is experiential learning. And the school system required a unit on epidemics. Shannon has a 7th grade group of students, and rather than talk about historic epidemics like a Black Plague, she decided to do what is a current epidemic and very meaningful to middle school students. So she wrote a 10-week curriculum that she basically has gifted to us, which is fantastic. So we are in the early stages of gathering surveys and piloting that so that we can potentially roll that out as well.
Now, that's a process as well. As an organization that has its own substance use prevention curriculum, I know about the process of making it evidence-based, and it takes a while to get there. But we've been working for several years on ours as well. And so I think any way that we can work together and teach children, there's just so many aspects of this that they should be learning about, and it's essential.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you mentioned the ultimate goal is to end up having been in every state with a final exhibit in D.C. I think about how fentanyl has killed more people than all of these wars combined. And I think about going, to the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C. and seeing just the names and how powerful that is to see all the names together, and you realize the magnitude. And this is so much greater than that.
Yeah. We don't anticipate a memorial, but it would be definitely, I think, something that, I envision them all covered with these portraits from every single state in the country. But, that's down the road. We have a lot of mileage to cover first.
Lots of states to go yet.
Lots of states. It's just picking up, though, and the bottom line is, and I'm sure you realize this too, Angela, you have to be able to fund all of this. It's one of the things that we have never skimped on. Everything is professionally done. We take each portrait and it's custom-made framing.
And with current cuts to universities and government and all the federal funding that state governments are losing, that could be an uphill battle for you.
Definitely. Yeah, for sure. So we're looking at all of that, but we still keep our eye on the goal. There's such a need. We have an amazing team now of people, primarily women, I might add, but for people around the country who have been amazing, invested in this project now. And it's not just Barbara and me. We have a whole group of people that are very, very committed to seeing this happen.
Teresa, has this project helped you with your grief?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. This is Devin, by the way. He's kind of like the poster child, or he's on everything. He's on a lot of promotional. And sometimes I'll open up a website and there is images, or I'll see it in a state and I think, we kind of joke a little in the family, like, where's Waldo kind of situation. Devin's in Alabama now, and Devin's in, all this. But this project has really given me an opportunity to, first of all, there's a great purpose for my work there. It also allows me to take small bites out of my grief, because if I had to sit in that space, especially early on, living with that kind of pain and that it's such a disconnect, it wouldn't have been good for me. So this has really been an incredible gift. I call it a gift from Devin in that sense. Sometimes I ask him what the heck he got me into. But, this was supposed to be retirement, not happening for me.
Yeah, me either.
Yeah.
Too much work to do. In Emily's name. Yeah, I get it. I get everything that you're saying. It's a beautiful thing.
It's a really, really beautiful thing. And what you're doing as well. It's just, I'm sure you can relate to the idea that, it is their legacy. I feel so often that I think about Devin and the 10 years before he died, he was really battling. And it's a harsh word, but he was really in and out of treatment and trying so hard. Didn't work out for him. But his ability and his energy and his person could very well live on through this work. And that's how I look at it. It's an extension of who he was. And I suspect you're feeling the same with Emily. It's like, this is how we live on with them.
Yes, and I always say the work that I'm doing, I'm not a singer, but this is my love song to my daughter. And I think that we do this as in honor of our children. It's a way to keep their legacy alive. It's a way to keep a piece of them alive. And my daughter also an artist, which makes what you're doing near and dear to my heart because it involves art. And we try to involve art as much as possible in the things that we do. And I just think that getting out of your own muck, your own, that horrible place that we all go as, I'll just say moms, because we're moms here in this group talking today, when we lose a child, but being able to rise above that and to do work that's meaningful to help other people and to honor other people. You think about all of the people you're honoring through the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
So important.
Yeah, I feel very fortunate, actually. As hard as it is to go through what we'd been through, I didn't waste any time. It was just like immediate. I knew what I needed to do.
There are gifts that are left behind. And it's really hard when you have the worst thing happen to you as a parent to look at it that way, right? I think it takes years and perspective. There are gifts that come out of these horrible things.
For sure.
And Into Light is certainly one of those gifts. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you. And thank you for what you're doing. It takes a tribe of people, so many.
Yep. I always say with this horrible epidemic, this drug and fentanyl poisoning epidemic, that it's taking a bunch of angry, I always say moms, but angry parents, doing the work, doing the demonstrations, putting together the nonprofits and the exhibits. And with the AIDS crisis, that's what it took, to get the funding to basically put an end to it being a death sentence, right?
Yeah.
And that's what it's going to take, and it's taking in this epidemic as well.
Yeah. We have to hit it at the emotional level to make a change. You can hear all the statistics in the world about it. That's not going to hit the heart. We have to hit the heart. And that's really our goal, is to get that emotion so that people are able to change their minds and their attitudes.
Right. Well, thank you for all the work that you're doing. And I hope to be able to see this project, this exhibit in my state as well, and many others. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
We appreciate our time.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Grieving Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about Into Light Project, you can find details in the show notes. And while you're there, we'd really appreciate it if you took just a moment to rate and review this episode. Please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Together, we can make a difference and help change lives. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, wishing you faith, hope, and courage. This podcast is produced by Casey Wonnenberg King and Marley Miller. Are you ready to protect the next generation from the dangers of substance use? Emily's Hope has created a comprehensive K-12 substance use prevention curriculum designed to educate, empower, and equip students with the tools they need to make healthy choices. Our age-appropriate lessons start in kindergarten and build through high school, using science, real stories, and interactive learning to help kids understand their bodies, brains, and risk of drug use. We're already reaching thousands of students across multiple states, and we're just getting started. Visit emilyshopeedu.org to learn more and share our curriculum with your school administrators and counselors. At Emily's Hope, we believe prevention begins with education. Let's work together to keep our kids safe.